Good evening and welcome to Celebrating Connections. We're here tonight to honor Mark Sloan, who led the Halsey Institute of Contemporary Art as Director and Chief Curator for 26 years. I'm Katie Hirsch, Interim Director of the Halsey Institute. You might have seen the statistics. Mark has curated 245 exhibitions with over 343 artists, and is responsible for raising more than $6 million for the Halsey Institute in external support. Mark's career is astounding and has launched the careers of so many others. What these numbers don't reflect, however, are the numerous packages, letters, and creative missives that would flow into our office each week for Mark from artists he's worked with from around the world. The numbers don't show the many letters of support he's written for students, interns, and staff applying for jobs and graduate school. The numbers don't tally up the evenings he and his wife, Michelle, opened their home to visiting artists, lecturers, and Halsey supporters. To work for Mark was to work with Mark in a highly collaborative and supportive relationship. What we want to share tonight is just how deeply Mark's impact reverberates. What follows are 4 interviews between Mark and artists who have exhibited at the Halsey Institute. Interspersed, we'll hear messages from Halsey supporters along the way. We'll first hear Mark in conversation with Leslie Wayne. The two discuss Mark's curatorial beginnings and philosophy, diving into how he guided the Halsey over the last 26 years.
So, Mark Sloan, this is an honor and a great pleasure to talk with you this morning. And I want to ask you about your time at the Halsey, but before we do, I'd love to know, just in a few words from you, what brought you to become a curator in the first place?
Well, thank you for asking that. I don't get asked that question very often. It's a bit of a circuitous answer, but it actually is quite revealing, I think. When I was a young man, young boy growing up in North Carolina, snow was a very infrequent thing. And whenever it snowed, I would go out and make a snowball. And my father had a drugstore, and I would use, he had these manila tags that he used for labeling things, for putting prices on things. And I had a box of those, and I labeled the snowball. So December 26th, whatever year it was, 1971, 4-inch snow, and I'd put it in a snowball, and I'd write it on the tag, and I'd put it in the freezer at our house. And I had a snowball collection that built up over the years. Well, one day, and there were maybe 20 or so snowballs, and they all were labeled. They kind of shrunk over time a little bit, but they still had their labels and everything was intact. Well, one day I came home from school, and I think my mother had some sort of a gathering of women, a coffee thing or something, and needed freezer space. And so she took my tray out that had all my snowballs in it. And I came home from school, and all of my snowball collection was melted, and you could just see the labels, and all the ink on the labels had run. And anyway, it was, my whole collection had been destroyed. But it made me, it was instructive, because I mean, it wasn't at the time, I was very angry, but I've since become very interested in ephemeral art.
You know, of course, about David Hammond's snowballs.
And so it also had to do with, for me, the idea of impermanence and not being attached to. So I ran a museum with no collection. So it actually worked out really, really well that this happened to me.
So you actually have built a program at the Halsey that has a reputation of being very broad and very adventurous. You've shown artists who have gone on to become international stars like Nick Cave and Shepard Fairey, but you've also shown a lot of artists that are accomplished, but not so widely known and maybe even in your mind a little bit overlooked. So what is your criteria when you choose an artist? And also, do you have a kind of, this is question number 2, an overarching vision for the architecture of the program as a whole?
Very good question. So I do, I'll answer the second part first, which is that I think of or thought of, now that I'm retired, I thought of the exhibitions program at the Halsey over a long time horizon. I would never think of it like as a one season or, you know, even a year. We would look at 2 to 3 years, and with the staff, we would look at and see, okay, is there enough diversity here? And so we look for diversity of thought, geographic diversity, the diversity of the artists' backgrounds, etc. We also wanted to make sure that we had gender parity, and I think in the 245 shows I did, it was well over 50% were women, and a very high percentage were artists of color and or non-US born artists, and a lot of them live in other countries. But we tried to make sure that we had installation art, painting, a variation, printmaking. We haven't done a printmaking show in a while. We need to do that, or we need to do a photography show, or we want to do something that deals with social issues or political issues. So we wanted to look at it from that perspective. Really, I felt the role of the Halsey was to try and provide a glimpse into what the world out there is and what it's made up of, and who populates it, and how they think, and from different cultures and things. So it was important to bring in artists from other countries and have them in residence. So from Japan or India or Colombia or Indonesia, it was important to have them physically there so that they could have an exchange with the students and the people. And to get to your first question, what is it I look for? I was always interested in artists who have a depth and whose work poses difficult and challenging questions to us as viewers. And I'll take, for example, the artist Leslie Wayne, who I happen to be talking to. When I first saw your work, I was really attracted to the fact that you were making paintings, and they were, in a sense, landscapes, although at the time you were making landscape looking paintings, and they appeared to have strata or layers of geologic or archaeologic time embedded in them, and they were made of paint. They were not representational in the sense of, you were not making a painting of a landscape. You were making a painting that was a landscape. And so to me, you inverted, instead of making an abstract painting, you made a painting, you used paint to make an abstraction. And so I remember seeing this one piece that was just paint, that was done in layers, and it was folded, and we showed it in the Halsey. It was just layers of paint that were folded over like this. And and you know, I remember you saying, that's my painting. Well, it wasn't a painting, that's your paint. And so I loved the inversion of that. I loved how you took this notion of abstraction and of painting and turned it on its head. And so it caused a lot of head scratching and questioning on the part of our audience, like, well, how is this? And does this thing ever dry because there's so much paint on it? Or, you know, I mean, people were asking those kinds of silly, almost practical questions, but at the same time, I think they were getting the feeling, they were starting to understand that what you were dealing with conceptually was an incredibly sophisticated idea. So that appealed to me. You presented a conundrum that was very interesting to me. Leslie, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience working with the Halsey, and if you could share with our viewers how we met, and if you can remember. I'm not sure I remember
Yeah,
exactly, but
I think that we met over email, actually, before we met in person. You had known my work, but I think the mutual connection was Julie Evans.
hmm,
And maybe I reached out to you. I don't remember, actually.
mhm.
But you just responded, and we had a email conversation, and then you made the invitation, and it was the first time I ever had a traveling exhibition, a survey exhibition, which was really a huge opportunity and a great way to see sort of a 5-year span of my work in one magnificent space. Amazing. And I remember my husband Don and I came down early to look at the space, which I'm really glad we did, because you can't tell from a floor plan. I mean, looking at the floor plan, I was absolutely sure that I would put certain pieces on one wall and others on another. And when we got down there and kind of felt the very high ceilings that you have, we pretty much almost completely changed our idea of the installation. Uh, so it was fantastic opportunity to curate bodies of work over a period of time, to see the trajectory of my thinking and making over that time.
So one of the things that I just to sort of park on the traveling exhibition component of it, that was a challenge for us, and it's a story about your work, because your work is so incredibly fragile and tactile and delicate. It was difficult, and I remember we had these discussions about how we were going to package them for touring, crate them, and that became a whole, learning experience for us, my staff and I, and so and I remember when your work arrived. I can't remember if it was Tufts University or where it was, but the work arrived, and the director called me up and said, "Oh, we've had this. One of the pieces arrived, and there was a small piece broken off." And she sent me a picture of it, and I sent it to you. And I had already, before calling you, I had contacted a friend of mine and gotten the name of a art conservationist who could re-glue it with archival glue and make it look like it had never, and it was a small piece, like a 1/2 inch by 3 inches, but it had fallen off the painting in the box, in the crate. And so you said, it's just the nature of my work. That's going to happen. No problem. So it's like, okay, well, and so I called the director of that museum, and it's like, it was the easiest, but you could have easily been rather difficult about it, or just adamant about getting it fixed and making sure it was back to normal and all that. You said, that's just the nature of my work. It's fragile, it's delicate, it's like a living, breathing
Well,
thing.
also, I think because the work is all about that body of work anyway, my work's changed a lot since then, but that body of work was so much about geology and the forces of nature. It's like, yeah, the forces of nature. Things fall apart, they break, and it kind of was conceptually part and parcel of the idea of the work. And luckily, most people, nobody would have noticed anyway.
Well, that's nice of you to say, but it's for those of us in the museum world who guard these things with our lives, and when something like that happens, we swing into action in a way, and it's so refreshing to hear an artist say, "Oh, yeah."
Well, I'm glad I was able to make your life easier.
Yeah, you were a delight to work with, and that was, the whole thing was a really fun run, and it was, and it also was the beginning of our friendship, which I have cherished over these years, and
I
it's been really wonderful to watch your work grow, and I
Thank you.
wish you continued success and
Thank
everything you do, and
Thank you. And I look forward to staying in touch with what you're doing, and maybe one day we'll collaborate again.
That could very easily happen.
Yeah.
So.
Hello, my name is Carrie Forrest, and I'm the Low Country Program Director for the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation. It's my honor to be given an opportunity to say a few words about our friend and colleague, Mark Sloan. Mark is one of the most passionate voices for the arts, not just in Charleston, but in the entire region. I remember when I started with the foundation almost 6 years ago, Mark was one of the first voices that I sought out to get his perspective on what was needed to create a vibrant artistic community. And since then, I have repeatedly counted on Mark's guidance and wisdom as we've worked together on a number of initiatives, including the increase of affordable live-work space for artists, as well as working with the City of Charleston on guidelines for public art. Mark is both concerned with the elevation of contemporary art, but also the support and nurturing of visual artists. Under his leadership, the Halsey has brought breathtaking and thought-provoking art from all across the country to these walls here at the Halsey. And he has expanded the vision and awareness, not just of the students at the College of Charleston, but also to the community as a whole, artists and enthusiasts alike. And Mark, while I find it hard to think that you really are going to retire, I wish you the best in whatever future endeavors that you decide to pursue, and I hope that you get some much-deserved rest. Thank you.
Next, Dr. Fahamu Pecou talks to Mark about the Halsey's role as a laboratory for exploring the urgent issues of our time. Fahamu's 2016 exhibition, Do or Die, Affect, Ritual, Resistance, was a vital component of his doctoral degree from Emory University.
Hey, Fahamu, how you doing, man?
Hey, Mark, it's great to see you, my friend.
Nice to see you as well. Well, for the purposes of our event tonight, I'd love to ask you a little bit about, I think people are curious. They ask me all the time, how do you find your artists and how do you get them to do what they do in the gallery? And in your case, it was a little bit of an unusual situation in that I had seen your work. I can't remember where I saw it, maybe at the High Museum or online. I think I saw it online and called you and we started a conversation, and then you came to Charleston, right? And you met, and we met at the Halsey. You saw we invited you there and you saw the space, and we started talking and we said we'd like to work together in the future.
Mhm.
And I wonder if you could take it from there and talk about how it developed from there.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, in that conversation, your exact words were, I'd love to work with you when the time is right. And I remember, that meeting fondly because I think we were introduced by Rebecca Cochran. I think she had connected us to one another. And as fate would have it, maybe a year later, I got home from school one day. At the time I was doing my PhD at Emory. I came home from school. I checked the mailbox. There was a large envelope, like one of those manila envelopes in the mailbox. And when I opened it up, it was a copy of the Post Courier. And on the front page was the article about Walter Scott, who's a gentleman who was shot in the back by a police officer. And part of the sensationalism of that story, aside from the fact that this man had done nothing wrong and was shot in the back, was that the officer was also caught trying to plant a gun at the scene to suggest that Walter Scott had pulled the gun on him. But anyway, as I pulled this paper out of the envelope and I'm looking at it, there was a sticky note attached to it, and it simply said, "It's time." And that was my invitation from you to began thinking about a project that we could do together at the Halsey.
Mhm. And can you talk a little bit about, get to the heart of what it was that your work was about at that time and how it evolved before it ended up on the walls at the Halsey? What was your thinking and what was the evolution of that concept?
Sure. When we initially met, and for years, prior to that, my work had largely orbited around representations of Black male masculinity in media and popular culture. And so I was always very much interested in and invested in destabilizing the stereotypes about Black men. And that has been a really rich field to play in. I've explored these ideas through a number of conceptual devices, actually in many cases taking on those stereotypes myself and like literally getting inside of them and trying to explode them from the inside out. By the time we had begun talking, my work was also shifting into explorations of Black identity and really trying to get to the root of who we are as Black people, right? And sort of shaking off the constructs that have been imposed on us by other people and really sort of asking the question, like, who are we? And it's really led me to the space of exploring my own personal relationship with African spirituality, and understanding myself, understanding myself through the lens of African spirituality and how that discovery might lead other Black people to find themselves as well, and again to kind of be able to resist the negative images and ideas that exist around Black identity. And so I was already in this space of kind of interrogation, incorporating elements from African spiritual concepts, from other movements of what I call Black awareness movements, like the Civil Rights Movement, the Harlem Renaissance, Negritude, like all of these different periods where you've had this sort of mass or critical mass of engagement with these questions around Blackness and Black identity. And so I was already kind of tapping into those spaces and, pulling out ideas and pulling out concepts and really trying to investigate them in a number of ways. And when we began talking about this particular exhibition, this was during a season of really aggressive violence by police officers against Black people. I mean, starting as early as 2012, I would say, with the killing of Trayvon Martin is really when these kinds of incidents really sort of took center stage in the media. I think at that moment, the influence of social media, cell phones and videos and cameras and all these kinds of things really drew people's attention to this crisis in a way that was significant. Mind you, protestations about police violence and police overreach in Black communities goes as far back as Black communities go. But I think largely those complaints were ignored or overlooked by the general public because they didn't have access to actually see these things go down. So it was like our word against theirs.
And it was often left up to white juries to make the decisions. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. But then again, like in 2012 with Trayvon Martin, like now you're actually seeing this, like, Tamir Rice, Walter Scott, like it was almost like at one point it felt like almost every 2 weeks or every month you have a new story about a Black person who was unarmed and killed by police for something really ridiculous.
And then we had the Emmanuel AME map happened.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Same time period.
So all of these things really sort of came together, like I said, like a critical mass. And I think my initial reaction was thinking about some kind of memorial. I think that was my initial thought. But as I began to, sort of like marinate on the ideas, I realized that that's not what I wanted to say. Like I didn't want to affirm that violence. I didn't want to reiterate that violence or establish it as some sort of norm. I really wanted to do something that would be that would resist that. And as I mentioned before, at the time I was doing my PhD, and I was really already invested in this notion of death-bound subjectivity within Black culture, right? This compulsion to locate death as this like inevitable thing of the Black experience, right? And this is also coming out of my own experience,
So you mentioned earlier a little about your PhD, and you hold a record actually for the Halsey. I believe your exhibition at the Halsey was the first and only time that an exhibition there has functioned as a dissertation. So could you talk a little about that?
Yeah, so that is, the entire experience of working with you in the Halsey ended up being very fortuitous, because at the time I was in the stage of drafting what my dissertation was going to be. And initially I was going to do a dissertation on Kanye West and notions of resistance embedded in Kanye West's music and performance and work and stuff, et cetera. But this project came in and I realized that I could do what I was trying to do with this examination of Kanye West through my own work, right? This, to talk about resistance, to talk about healing, to talk about, the sort of restorative ways that African spiritual systems can feed us. And so this project, Do or Die, ended up becoming my dissertation. I also, petitioned the university to get them to accept a visual dissertation. And they were overwhelmingly supportive of the idea. To this day, I think I'm the only person ever from Emory to have a visual dissertation. Yes, there is still a 200-page document that I wrote, but it incorporates the exhibition. But the actual exhibition, the experience of the exhibition itself, is the dissertation. And that was really at the core of what I wanted to communicate through this project as well, right? Like, oftentimes we think about academic work, as that thing over there, right? Similar to how we often treat artwork, like, it's our institutions, create these almost barriers, around art, where they just become these kind of like stoic objects, on a white wall in a space. I wanted to do something that would be an experience, right? And largely because I felt that the concepts, the idea, the messages in the work were so important that it couldn't just live as some document that's filed away in the library somewhere. Like, this needed to be something that people could touch and feel. And that's what, ultimately we do this work for, right? As scholars, as artists, we do this work to impact lives. And so I wanted to create a dissertation that would actually have real impact in real time.
So action, not just words or images. It would be a call to action. So Fahamu, we, in addition to after your traveling show was there, we stayed in touch with you. And of course, we follow your career as we do with all the artists who show with us. And then we invited you to participate in our most recent online exhibition called Displacements, which revisitations of home, which we did as a virtual exhibition, obviously during the pandemic. And we were delighted that you were willing to participate in that. But could you talk a little bit about your relationship with the Halsey and how it were like gum on your shoe?
Yeah, it's the Halsey is like home, and I don't mean that lightly or superficially. Like, it's really literally, like, if I see anything on my phone that says Halsey, like I click immediately. I don't even read it half the time. Just where do you need me to be? What do you need me to do? I'm there. There's such a great level of care and compassion that's exuded by the team there. Like everyone really takes great pride in the hospitality part of the space of this institution. There's nothing cold or sterile about working with the Halsey in any capacity. Doing this project with the Revisitations of Home, I was partnered with Ruth Rambo to have a dialogue around notions of home that are in my work through her interpretation. And we're coming across from different generations having, these really powerful dialogues, right? And again, I think, these opportunities that really challenge us and grow us and push us are imperative. And Halsey is really at the cutting edge of creating these kinds of experiences and opportunities. So I feel honored and thrilled to be a part of that family.
It will continue well into the future. Okay.
I look forward to it.
Sounds great.
Hi, I'm Kate Nevin. I moved to Charleston about 20 years ago. Clearly, I was a toddler, or as Mark used to say, born in Borneo at age 2. And I knew I wanted to get into the art scene. I had moved down from New York City. I floundered around for a little bit until that goddess Leela Ross introduced me to the Halsey. And wow, from that moment on, my life was a creative explosion of ideas, adventures, installations, and connections to some of the most remarkable people I have ever met. And of course, artists, locally, nationally, and internationally. Incredibly talented and inspiring artists. And this universe was brought to me courtesy of Mark Sloan, the longtime director and curator of the Halsey. What hooked me was that I instantly got the impression that Mark was up for anything. Almost any creative rabbit hole was worth going down. Of course, as a director and curator, he had a clear niche and some boundaries and knew instinctively what to leave in and what to leave out. Yet, he was always willing to give something with an ounce of promise a try. And that's the kind of person I want to hang around with. And that was the sense across the entire board where I served for about 6 years. Mark was up for anything, and we were along for the ride. He was the "Oh Captain, my captain" of the good ship Halsey. But Mark reminds me a little bit of Miss Frizzell from the Magic School Bus. If any of you have kids, you might kind of understand that analogy, but I have to say, Mark and his Magic School Bus took us on some life-changing adventures. A couple of my personal favorites: his willingness to adopt and encourage and adapt my soup to nuts dinners with artists into programming at the Halsey. One of my highlights was a dinner with Jeff Whetstone and the turkey soup. More to that story. And the crazy adventures with Eames Demetrios and the Chimera Sphere. Wow, that was fun. And then to be brought into the brilliant worlds of Aldwith and Renée Stout, it's just like mind explosion. Shepard Fairey's project was transformative for public art and the city. And of course, Hitness and his Audubon journey. Hitness stayed with my family for much of his project and left this lovely owl behind me as a gift. Now Hitness is a part of our family for life. So many of these artists have come in to my life in interesting ways, and many have remained. I'll be grateful for Mark for that forever. And Mark's brilliant award-winning books, which he generously gave away. The one that I love the most, I think, is the defining of his career, Southbound. Sometimes I just flip through that like it's an old family album. I see something new on every page and have a memory of places where I may have never been. Mark is one of the most inclusive, open-minded, curious, kind, and intelligent humans I know. There was my life before the Halsey, well, pretty good, and then my life after the Halsey, way better. I'm so grateful for being shown the power that art, artists, and activists can have on making the world we live in a better, more imaginative, and inspiring place. Thank you, Mark, for your leadership at the Halsey and in the community. I'd like to hitch a ride to wherever your magic bus is going next. All the best.
Now, Shepard Fairey speaks with Mark about returning to his hometown of Charleston to share his work at the Halsey Institute and how we can all benefit from provocative art.
Hi, Shepard. Nice to see you, my friend.
Hey, Mark, how are you?
I'm well. We would like to, I'd love to just have a conversation with you in front of our Zoom audience about your relationship with the Halsey over time, and maybe we could start with your first exhibition, which was back in 2001, 2002, around in there, and what that meant for you. And
Sure. I mean, first, since I grew up in Charleston and always felt like there wasn't an exciting contemporary art scene, to be invited to show at the Halsey, at the College of Charleston, an academically legitimate show was a big deal for me. I was only 31 or 32 at the time, and was mostly known for my renegade street art. And I was really happy that I also got to do a talk and explain what I was doing. And that's when we first met. And you were, you were very understanding of the concepts behind my work. I was impressed by your sort of the depth of your curatorial vision, I guess you could say. And also, there was a bit of backlash. So I remember there was an editorial in the paper or a letter to the editor or whatever, of somebody saying, this guy's public enemy number one. If his artwork is celebrated, then it's just going to encourage vandalism all over the city. And you got some heat from that. And you didn't shrink away from it. And then 12 years later, you invited me back to do a much bigger show, as well as a big public art program in 2014, and then I got to show with Jasper Johns, one of my heroes in the other room, a fellow South Carolinian. So it's been great to work on this project. It's like the prodigal son returns. My parents always told me that everything I was doing was going to lead to nothing but poverty, ruin, and disreputation. So it's a bit of validation for me, but also it's not just quaint. You're somebody that's put together, to me, so many really challenging and exciting shows. And I'm included in what I think is sort of a series of shows that I'm proud to be associated with.
And so you mentioned the public component. You did 5 interventions within the city. Well, let's say, let me rephrase that. You did 5 officially sanctioned installations within the city, and then you and your crew did some unauthorized or unsanctioned projects as well. But I'm wondering if you could, talk a little bit about the process of your coming to town and selecting venues, and what goes into your thinking behind that.
Art in the streets is a pillar of my practice, because I'm all about engaging an audience that doesn't engage with art otherwise, that doesn't go to galleries, doesn't go to museums. I think the galleries and museums are, very important venues for experiencing art, but I'd rather create a bigger audience for art by taking it straight to the people. And whether I'm doing that with permission or without, to put art where people live and can digest it in a way that they don't feel judged, they don't feel intimidated by the environment, is really important to me. I also think that a lot of people don't think about the signage, the communication, the architecture, the way the the landscape of the city impacts them psychologically, and intervening with art is a way to get people to think a little bit more about the nature of advertising, government signage, commercial signage, and architecture itself, and the flow of ideas. Who controls the flow of ideas? So I like to put my work anywhere that I think is a good prominent showcase. And before I had connections, beggars couldn't be choosers, I would pretty much go anywhere that I thought wasn't destructive. But by 14, I think enough people knew who I was that you and Angela Shavarek and the rest of your team were able to reach out to people who own properties in really good locations and send me over options. And I mean, that was an embarrassment of riches for me to have the luxury of choosing a lot of these great spots on Upper King, Lower King, close to the college, the really prominent spot right next to the Halsey, and the top of the Francis Marion. I mean, these are like things I never could have imagined being able to do in Charleston when I first began my street art project.
The one on top of the Francis Marion, which was really spectacular, your Andre the Giant overlooking Marion Square. The owner of the Francis Marion was quite kind to let us do that. But it is interesting that the people, even to this day, when they see the video that we produced of that, they think it was digitally put there, that there's no way we've really gotten permission to do that. And people thought I sprinkled pixie dust on the mayor's cereal, or somehow that there was no one could believe that we got that prominent location for your piece. But I think a lot of that has to do with your hometown status, your international reputation, and also the fact that the Halsey was behind it allowed it to have that prominent city presence. And I only wish the one on the Francis Marion were still there. That was a really great one.
It was visible from across the Cooper River. Yeah, from where the Yorktown is, you could still see it, which was just absolute insanity. But the unexpected thing that happened from that image being there, which was I try to see all the angles, but I didn't see this one, but it was so good. It's that was looking directly at the John C. Calhoun statue, and someone immediately took a photo with the John C. Calhoun statue in the foreground and the Obey icon looking down on it in the background, with laser beams coming out of Andre's eyes, blowing up John C. Calhoun.
Which actually happened.
and then it eventually happened. Sometimes I think art is a way to manifest an idea that people haven't, they haven't envisioned it yet. And, if you envision it and you present it, then it can become a reality. Yeah. And, George Floyd being murdered probably also had a good bit to do with that. It's not just my art, and all the other insane police brutality that I try to address in my work, which is not funny at all. But, that was, trying to spark conversations that wouldn't happen otherwise is what I'm trying to do with my art. And that's a perfect example of that happening.
Mm-hmm. What was it like having that show in your hometown? And were you able to reconnect with some old friends and that kind of thing, and see people you hadn't seen in a while?
It was amazing. A lot of my high school friends still live in Charleston, and people I grew up skateboarding with, and we felt like it was us against the world. We would get arrested for skateboarding. We would get hassled, and to have my work in such a prominent venue and have a huge turnout for the talk that we did and the opening itself. I think a lot of my friends were proud. They thought like, ultimately we triumphed. We were seen as the barbarians at the gates destroying Western civilization in the 80s, but ultimately that's what happened. And the joke I made was, these people, they understand my psychology. Once the resistance is gone, I'm demotivated. They're trying to demotivate me. But but anyway, I think what it is that you were so skilled at at greasing the wheels that I didn't encounter the resistance I usually do, and that was a very pleasant experience. I know my parents were proud, and despite our conflicts in the past, that meant a lot to me.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, that's nice. Yeah, you don't get that in Barcelona or a lot of these other places where you show. You don't have but you have the home field advantage there.
Yeah, well, showing in Charleston and seeing how far Charleston's come as a creative community. It's always had a creative side to it, and the Spoleto Festival's been there, and I'm not trying to say that it's completely provincial, but seeing just how far the contemporary art scene has come in Charleston is really exciting. And I know that your programming for the Halsey has made a big difference. And there's a ripple effect from that. So seeing a lot of the other things that have happened, it's one of the things I'm trying to do with my art is create a template of empowerment, put ideas out there that maybe, people aren't encountering, and then hopefully create a chain reaction. And I think that's what you've done with the Halsey.
Well, thank you. What would you envision if you could paint your perfect picture for a future of art in Charleston? What might that look like?
Well, I think that conceptually it would be to point out the fact that a lot of the things that Charleston relies on to draw in tourism are creative, and some of them are based on creativity that's hundreds of years old. But the creativity now that will draw people in another 200 years is also something to consider. So that cycle that could be supported and incubated in a really robust, healthy way. That's what I'd like to see for Charleston.
When your show was at the Halsey and this very well-dressed couple come walking in, I think they were Spoleto people, and who knows if they were there to see an opera or whatever, but they stumbled upon the Jasper John Shepard Fairey show that we had, the Insistent Image, and they walked in and they looked around. They went into Jasper John's room and looked around. They came in and they looked in the Shepard Fairey in the main gallery and looked around, and then they came up to the attendant who was sitting there, Maggie Jordan, and asked her, they said, are these local artists or professional? And Maggie, without missing a beat, said, oh, they're definitely local. So I thought you would appreciate that. Local or professional, like there's some kind of distinction between.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, maybe they were looking for the person who painted that year's duck stamp. That was what I was always told was the high bar to reach. And that's fine. That's fine.
Absolutely.
A lot of times I think that it's like what you were saying earlier. Change starts off as threatening, and then once you digest for a little while, it becomes the new thing becomes part of your DNA, and that's a process. Maybe they went in there and they thought, oh, this isn't good enough to be professional artists, but then it sat in their brains and festered or blossomed, however you want to look at it, and they saw something else. I've found that people sometimes have to see my imagery many times before they then say, oh, I've never even seen it before. And then all of a sudden they say, wait, now it's everywhere. And it was there the whole time, but it just takes a minute for it to register. So that's why my approach of being quite persistent tenacious, I think, has paid off.
It's a little like learning a new word. You know how sometimes when you learn a new word and then suddenly you see that word everywhere, and wasn't it nice of everyone to wait until you learned it before they started using it?
Exactly. So yeah, let's hope that we're expanding everyone's art vocabulary.
I hope so. I hope so. Well, thank you, Shepard. I really appreciate it. It's been a delight to talk to you, and thank you for all of your support over the years. You've been a real friend to the Halsey, and this isn't the end. So I'm now an art consultant, so we'll see if we can potentially work together in the future as well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, back at you. I look forward to when we can, have a beer post-pandemic. But until then, keep up the awesome work.
Okay. Thanks so much, my friend. Okay.
January 15th, 2021. Dear Mark, I remember well when you arrived at the Halsey Gallery. Reading about all the extraordinary exhibitions and artists that you brought to HICA took me down memory lane. What an amazing 26 years of seeing that institution evolve into what we see today. You made that happen. You can be proud of the great exhibitions that you presented, the fundraising among national funders, the height to which you have elevated a college gallery from the Halsey Gallery to the Halsey Institute for Contemporary Art, the increase in individual support, and record-breaking attendance at art openings. I could go on, but suffice it to say that your leadership propelled the Halsey into a world-class institution. Thank you for all you have done to help shine a light on the arts in South Carolina, and for presenting exciting artists, exhibitions, educational programs for the citizens of this state. Congratulations on your retirement, and best wishes for your next adventure. Best regards, Harriet Green, Director of Visual Arts.
In this final interview, Renée Stout and Mark discuss his challenge to her to create new work and how this embodies Mark's curatorial philosophy at the Halsey.
Hey, Renée Stout.
Hi, Mark Sloan.
How are you? So I would like to, we've had a long association, haven't we? And a long
Yes, we
friendship.
have.
So I remember seeing your book, Astonishment and Power, which was the catalog from your exhibition at the Smithsonian, correct? And that was in
Yes.
1993?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I remember contacting you, being a very cheeky new director at the Halsey. And I thought, well, this is work that I just love, and I would love to have this artist come to Charleston.
Mm-hmm.
And I contacted you and then visited you, and we talked, and you came up with this idea of doing a juke joint, recreating a juke joint from your youth called Wiley Avenue Juke. I wonder if you could talk just for a minute about that.
Yeah, Wiley Avenue was sort of this well-known street in Pittsburgh's Hill District. And the Hill District was the place where the playwright August Wilson grew up. So a lot of his plays are based in the Hill District and that rich culture of, there were like musicians and artists. And, Pittsburgh, at that point in time in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, was like a well-kept secret. There's a lot of creativity that really came out of there. And I had a boyfriend who lived in that area. So we were always on Wiley Avenue. There was a diner we used to eat at, which happens to be one of the diners that August Wilson would come in and sit down and write parts of his plays, having coffee. And there is not a specific Wiley Avenue juke. However, there were bars up and down. So sometimes me and my boyfriend would go in and have a beer. So it was just the atmosphere, I think, the whole atmosphere that inspired the creation of this Wiley Avenue juke, and the spirit of August Wilson, and, you know, just that rich culture in Pittsburgh was what the Wiley Avenue juke was dedicated to.
And you also had, so what you did was you created these panels and in your studio, which we then transported to the Halsey and attached to the walls. And we created, actually, for all intents and purposes, we put a room within a room. We put the Wiley Avenue juke within the Halsey. And on the walls of that, you had created paintings, these fantastic paintings that had veves on them, but also information or rendition of, I remember Robert Johnson and something about his story and the cross.
And Ma Rainey and James Brown.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
And so and then we put these tables in the gallery with these red and white check tablecloths and salt and pepper shakers, hot pepper.
And you found a jukebox.
Yeah, and I found an old jukebox. And we create, and then at the opening reception, we had Big Boy Henry, who was a North Carolina blues legend. He had just been put into the Hall of Fame, came in and turned it into an actual juke joint. I mean, it was a juke joint. It was a Renée Stout juke joint, but we made it into an actual juke joint. And
with me and Jonathan Green dancing away in the middle.
Yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, that was awesome. So, and then some years passed, and you and I reconnect. Well, we stayed friends and had connections all over the years, but then we had we reconnected in Columbia, South Carolina, when you had a show at the Benedict College.
Right, I had a one-person show, right.
We had a solo exhibition there that Tyrone Jeter put together.
Exactly.
And he invited me up to be in conversation with you in the gallery. And so you and I had a conversation in the gallery in front of the audience. And then the next morning, you and I went to breakfast.
Right.
And I remember saying to you at that time, I was wondering what kind of shows you had coming up and this and that. And you had your regular shows at various galleries, and you were included in some group shows. And I said, well, when is there going to be like a Renée Stout museum show?
Right.
You know? And you said, well, there currently isn't one on the books. And I remember challenging you. Do you remember my challenge to you?
Oh, I definitely do. That was like yesterday. Yeah, I definitely remember you. Yeah.
What was the challenge?
The challenge was for me to create a body of work, based on some things that I had wanted to deal with, and you knew I wanted to deal with, after looking at my show and knowing my whole trajectory of, bodies of work. And you said to me, and if you can do this, I will do my best to raise the money for a catalog. And to me, that was one of the most inspiring things, to have somebody say, I'm going to do my best to produce a catalog, because what I'm finding is one of the most invaluable things in the art world is to be able to document work, especially when it's not being shown in the way that it should be shown. So at least you get the documentation, so that as years pass, when I'm dead and gone, I have this catalog that has an extensive body of work in it. And to me, that was very, very important. And so that challenge was what I needed in a big way at the time you proposed that. And so I took you up on it.
That brings us to a discussion about the Halsey. I mean, the example that we used with you is one that we've played out multiple times with many artists. We've issued the challenge of creating new work for us, because we really like to premiere work, and we like to be a place where artists are challenged to create something that will surprise themselves, as well as surprising us, and hopefully delighting our audience. But that's been something from early on that we've done. So we've done commissioned projects, and we've challenged artists. I mean, Fahamu was another example of an artist. We said, we wanted him to create a Fahamu Pecou. We wanted him to create a new body of work. Jiha Moon, same thing. Please make all new work. And that way we become a site that is generative. That is, in other words, we are not just a passive repository for the
Mhm.
display of artwork, but
Mhm.
we spur, hopefully, artists
Yes.
on to create works that they might not otherwise have done or felt.
And you're absolutely, yeah, because what's unique about your approach is most museums have curators, and curators have their own agenda and something they want to see. And so they will then go find the artists that fit that particular vision that they have. Whereas, you'll identify an artist whose work you're interested in. That's your agenda. You want to expose that artist. But then you don't take over and decide, and this is the work I want to have, and this is what I want. And this is not driven only by you. This is a collaborative effort. You say, what is it that you envision? I want to help you make that happen. I want to help you present that. And that is the best possible scenario that an artist could have, because you're not that curator that's, looking over my shoulder saying, well, I want this and I want that. You're allowing the artist to create the vision that they would like to see happen.
Mhm. Well, doesn't that make sense that that's an approach that more museums should take?
Yes, it is an approach that more museums should take, but what my frustration is with the art world is that suddenly the art makers aren't the ones that seem to be dictating what art is. The artists aren't, it's the curators, the collectors. There's this whole art world machine that has decided that they want to shape what art is instead of allowing the artist to shape what art is. And I think that that's why what you're doing is the thing that we need to see more of. We need to see more of this kind of approach to where, you provide the environment for the artist to be as creative as they can possibly be.
One of the things, again, I guess we could give the approach a name and just say that the Halsey has had a history of giving the artists the keys to the castle, in a sense. We have this beautiful space, we have access to, we can write grant funding. I believe yours was funded by a wide variety of sources. I believe we got an NEA grant and the Furthermore Foundation and several other major grants, but we also were able to travel the show, and that of course generated some income, which allowed us to do these things. But the idea of giving the artist the keys to the castle, it's such a powerful notion, because artists are often, or I guess museums in general, are seen as gatekeepers, as
Yes.
opposed to,
Right.
in a sense, providing artists with these unique opportunities.
Exactly. Like, it feels to me like so many people, like the galleries and the museums, seem to take what the artists do and filter it through something that they're doing, like the gatekeeper, and then it comes out as the product they want to see. Whereas to me at the Halsey, I really felt like there was no filter between me and what I wanted to create. What I think is important to add, and this goes back to the kind of the kind of curator director you are, or it's winding down now, but I don't think you're going to stop doing any of those activities. You just stop doing them at the Halsey. But I feel that you, in a way, connected. What I see are these two different art worlds. We have the art world of the self-taught outsider, untrained artist, and we have this so-called mainstream art world. You are a bridge to those things, and I think that that's important, and I think that that's the wave of the future. This is the way it should be. I don't see any separation between an untrained artist and a self-taught artist. A trained artist and a self-taught artist. It's art making. We're artists. We're all artists, and I don't think there should be this hierarchy. And you apparently don't think there should be either. And you made the Halsey reflect that.
Well, thank you. That is true. I don't see a difference either. They're just artists.
Yes.
And the same thing with whatever labels it might be, the idea of, African American artist or Asian American or
right.
whatever. That's less important to me. I guess for certain people, it checks off a box for them in a certain way, or that sort of thing. But we just refer to them. We have this extraordinary artist, this American artist, or this Chinese artist, or whatever. And we do, sometimes it is important to know that this is an Indonesian shadow puppet artist.
And that is fine.
And that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
The fact that this person is trained or untrained doesn't come, I mean, we don't make any distinction about that.
Exactly, because I think, it's important to say, okay, this is where this artist comes from. That way it gives the viewer sort of a reference point to understand the culture. Then they can do further research if they want to, because I think that opens people's eyes to what's out in the world. So it's all right to make that, that distinction when you're introducing an artist that you're showing, but you're then stepping back and saying, but that's an artist. That's not like they're relegated to this place over here because they're not accepted by the New York mainstream art world. You know what I mean? And I think that that's the issue that we have to deal with. And I think that museums should start to take a look at your model instead of what they have been doing, because clearly they wouldn't be having the problems they're having now if they would have taken your approach long time ago.
I appreciate that. Well, one of the things that we've always had the freedom to do the kinds of shows that we do, because for one thing, because we don't have a permanent collection, we're not reliant on collectors. And I think a lot of museums do shows because a collector will give them a body of work and say, if I'll give you this if you'll do a show of this artist's work. Well, that's a very different approach from ours, which is we go out and we seek artists that we want to collaborate with. And we give them the keys to the castle and we see what comes out of it. And that's a very different approach than someone being motivated by money to come into your museum. So
right. Well, what I'm hoping is that the person who comes after you will have the same kind of outlook that you did, because I would hate to see that disappear with your tenure. You were leaving the Halsey. I don't want to see the Halsey change into something that it wasn't. That I want to be something. I wanted to maintain what you established there.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. What I can say is, obviously, I will have no say so in this, and I will say too that change is good, and organizations change leadership all the time, and every director has his or her own particular tastes and proclivities and approaches. And I, for one, I know that the crew that is in place now has their own. I hired 2 whippersnapper curators, Brian Granger and Katie Hirsch, and Katie Hirsch is the new interim director, and I think the 2 of them have extraordinary taste, and their interest in artists interests me greatly, because they're selecting people that I wish I had known about. If I had known about them, I would have picked them, but I didn't know about them, and they're bringing them in. So to me, that's a very good sign that they're surprising me with the kinds of work that they're bringing in. But every organization changes, and that's just that's the nature of the beast. And how it will be, and the level of engagement with the artists and all of that stuff really remains to be seen. But we for 26 years, we had the model that I brought to it, for better or worse, and we managed to produce some really wonderful things. So,
well, the fact that you said that makes me feel better then. Yeah.
We'd feature 100 interviews if we thought they could even begin to capture how much Mark means to all of us. How many people can say that they've shaped not just a person or a place, but an entire vision? Through these interviews and messages, the traits that shine through as an enduring part of Mark's legacy at the Halsey Institute are his generosity, unquenchable curiosity, and commitment to the ideas of innovative artists. These qualities built the Halsey Institute into the adventurous space that you know and love today. This foundation will continue to drive the Halsey Institute's quest to showcase work that represents the art of now. I represent countless voices to say thank you, thank you, thank you, Mark. Thank you also to the artists and supporters who pitched in to provide this window onto the world of Mark Sloan. And of course, our continuous thanks to you, our members and fans. Your donations and support make it all possible. Thank you.